Welcome to the You on the Camino de Santiago podcast, Season 5. This podcast is for and about people getting ready for their first ever pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago in Spain, France, and Portugal. With your host, Camino guide and longtime pilgrim, Nancy Reynolds of the Camino Experience. Hola, pilgrims, and welcome back to this next episode of the podcast. Nancy here, coming to you from Northern California, where I am back home after a month on the Camino, and finally over jet lag. What an incredible trip it was. I led a group of 10 fabulous women on the Camino Francés from Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port to Pamplona. And then they all continued on toward Santiago on their own. But not on their own, because they then had a solid group of new pilgrim friends, or what some may call a Camino family. I could tell you all about the group and what happened while we were together. I could share with you the stories they continued to share in our WhatsApp group as they made their way west. And in sharing these stories, you might begin to get a sense of what walking the Camino Francés is really like. But not really. Not entirely, because even though my 10 pilgrims all started together, they each had their own unique Camino experience. And they are only 10 of the more than 500,000 pilgrims on the different Camino routes this year, all of whom are having their own unique experiences. If you have yet to walk a pilgrimage on one of the Camino routes, you may be wondering, what is it really like? Well, good news, bad news. You won't really know until you go and walk it yourself. But I think I can give you at least some sense of what it's really like, based on leading 15 groups from Saint-Jean-Pied-du-Port and from being a pilgrim myself since 2005. I know I can at least give you a healthy dose of reality, which may be different from what you see in all the videos on YouTube, and which will definitely be different from what you would see in the movie The Way. I'm going to be doing just that, actually, for the first-time pilgrims on my email list, coming up on Thursday, October 24th at 4 p.m. California time on a Zoom call. On that call, I'll be sharing photos and stories from my 2024 groups, and I will also share my take on the 4 essential ingredients to a successful start on the Camino Francés. And finally, I'll be extending an invitation to everyone on the call to join one of my 2025 Camino Experience groups. As of the day this episode is going live, October 15th, 2024, I have just 1 spot left in my May group and 6 spots left in my September group. Registration is, obviously, open for both groups. If you would like to attend the call on October 24th and you are not yet on my email list, you can get on it by following the link in the show notes or by going to my website, thecaminoexperience.com. And as a thank you for accepting me into your inbox, I will send you a free copy of my Camino Planning Roadmap. Now, if you're like me, you already get too many emails from people and companies badgering you to buy stuff or trying to motivate you with overhyped philosophies that may or may not work for you. Here's what you can expect from me once you are on my email list. Every Friday, you will receive something from me, and it will all be relevant to walking the Camino Francés. It might be a blog post with more of my top tips, or like today, an invitation to a free mini webinar or an announcement about my upcoming group walks. Also, from time to time, I offer specials on my signature program, the Camino Francés Getting Started Audio Guide, and I offer those only to my email list. If you ever get tired of my emails, no problem. You can unsubscribe at any time. I hope to see all of you aspiring first-time Camino Francés pilgrims on the 24th. Again, you can get on the list by going to the show notes and following the link there. or by going to my website, thecaminoexperience.com. Before I get to my guest today, I want to give a shout out to some of the people I met on the trail in September. Yes, I had the pleasure of crossing paths with some of my listeners. So shout out to Kathy and Scott from Canada, who I met on the terrace of Refuge Horizon on the very first day we started walking. And to Carolyn and Dorian, we got to share a dorm room at Horizon. And to Terry and Mary, who were almost guests on this podcast, but I couldn't get it scheduled before they took off for the Camino. After getting to know them via an email exchange, I met Terry and Mary on the train coming into Astorga. Funny story, we had been planning on meeting the next night for dinner in Rabanal del Camino, and in my mind, I imagined them walking to Rabanal the next day. But just as we were pulling into the station in Astorga, Terry recognized me sitting a few rows behind them on the train. All of these were such joy-filled meetups for me. I really can't tell you how much I love meeting my listeners on the trail. There were others of you on the trail that I didn't get to meet, but the pilgrims in my group did, and they sent me messages to let me know they had met you. So let me give a shout out to everyone who crossed paths with my group. They really did love meeting you. Now, as promised in the title of this episode and in the show notes, today you are going to be hearing from John from Canada, who walked the Camino Portugués with his 17-year-old son, Stephen. I first spoke with John in Season 4, Episode 14. As with many of the other stories in this season, John's story is filled with plot twists and stunning moments of connection to his son, to other pilgrims, and to God. Yes, we talk about rain gear, sleeping bags, and trekking poles, but the real story here is about what you do and who you are when things don't go as planned. This journey was a rite of passage of sorts for both John and Stephen, and not surprisingly, both have plans to return to walk the Camino again. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Let's hear from John. John, hi. Thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
Well, hi, Nancy. It's really good to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, I loved our initial conversation, the one we had back in April before you and your son, Stephen, left for the Camino. And I'm so eager to hear how it went. And also because there were so many elements to your story that I think hearing how it went will really make a difference for my listeners and hopefully also give you a chance to enjoy walking through your Camino again and give you a chance to relive some of those memories and some of the things that you took away from it.
That sounds great.
All right, good. Well, I'd like to start with just the facty kind of stuff. The way I always say it is let's put the pin in the map. So this time around, what I'd like you to do is to remind us what you had planned for, what you had intended to do with your son, Stephen. And I'll remind everyone, Stephen is 17 and recently graduated from high school.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So if you'll start with what you had planned and had intended to do, and then what actually happened.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks. So my son, Stephen, and I, we had planned to walk from Porto, Portugal to Santiago de Compostela. We were going to start on the coastal route and after a couple days, make our way in at rates and do the central route from there. We had planned on walking probably at about a 5-kilometer-an-hour pace, and we booked a few places overnight, but mostly we wanted to stay at albergues and just sort of play it by ear.
Did you plan out your stages in advance so you knew how far you wanted to go each day, or had you intended to just roll with it?
For the first few days, we had our stages planned by day, and then we had like a bunch of options depending on what our pace was going to be. At one point, we ended up doing 2 stages in one day because they were both really short, and we realized there weren't many significant hills in them. And so, one day we ended up doing a much longer day than we had planned from the beginning. But yeah,
all worked out. And then you were going to walk to Santiago, spend some
Mhm.
time there, and then I believe you were going on to the coast. What was the plan for after Santiago?
Yeah, thanks. So when I planned it for myself, I wanted to make it to Santiago as I involved my 17-year-old son. He was like, "We got to walk to the ocean," and I was gonna like leave a rock from home in Santiago, and he was like, "Let's throw them in the ocean at the end." So the plan was, yeah, first to go to Santiago, check things off for Dad, and then from Santiago spend 4 more days and walk out to the coast in Finisterre.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. What actually happened?
Well, so plan and reality. They're related, but they're, not identical twins.
They're
Um,
similar. We see you're on the same route
yeah,
with
very
the
good.
same
So
person.
very good. Yes, all of that. So we started in Porto and we went from Porto. We landed, and on that same day we started walking. Went down to the cathedral and got our Compostelle, got our credencial, and then started walking along the coast and just up to Matosinhos, where we had a place booked overnight, and that was just delightful. We kept on pinching ourselves, couldn't believe we were actually doing this with all the planning and watching videos. I remember walking along that boardwalk that you can kind of see through to the water along the Douro River, and like, wow, we are really here. It was quite fascinating. Stephen was very excited. I remember in that first hotel that we stayed in Matosinhos, just like, I couldn't believe I was here. And I was like, wow, I'm going to spend 2 weeks with my teenage son. This could be intense.
That's a brave undertaking. I
Yeah.
remember being 17. I would not have wanted to spend 2 weeks with me.
Well, and braver for him. I remember being 17. I wouldn't have wanted to spend 2 weeks with my dad. So
Well, there's that. Yes.
I give him credit. I give him credit.
Let me insert a question here, if I may.
Fire away. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you said that you landed in Porto and you started walking the same day. What had you planned it that way instead of, say, staying a night in Porto or even 2 nights in Porto to enjoy the city?
Yeah, so we had planned that after being in Finisterre, because we were flying back out of Porto at the end, that depending on how travel went, we would either add an extra day in Santiago, add an extra day at Finisterre, add an extra day at Porto. And so as we were going along, the eventual plan was to spend an extra day in Porto at the end rather
At
than
the
at the
end.
beginning.
Gotcha.
Our flight was a direct overnight flight from Toronto,
Ah,
and so we arrived in Porto in the morning, and it was like, let's just get walking. So, and Matosinhos is not that far, right?
all right. Okay. So first day to Montesinos. What happened next?
So then I said to my son as we were going to bed that night, I said, ideally, I'd like to start early in the morning. And he's like, ideally, I'd like to start mid-morning. But we agreed on that first morning as we're walking together that we would leave at 5:30 in the morning. So
Oh, wow.
5:30 in the morning, we leave Matosinhos, we start walking along the shore. And in my optimistic mind, I thought, we'll stop at the first coffee shop and grab some food and everything else. But if you know that part of the coast, it's a lot of high-end touristy stuff. But in May, there's not a lot of food right there at the coast. And so we didn't get food right away. And Stephen started complaining about a sore stomach. And by about 9 o'clock, we did eventually eat breakfast and we were satiated and everything else. But by about 9 o'clock in the morning, he was vomiting
Hmm.
and not feeling well at all. And so we would stop. I would say, you don't have to push yourself, take a rest. And so those really cool chairs that are along the shore and on the Portuguese coastal route. He was laying in one of those for about 45 minutes. And then at the end of that, I said, do you want to get going? And he's like, you know what, Dad, I think I need to just go to bed for the day.
Ugh. Well, there's a wrench in the plans.
I'm like, what?
Hang on.
But at the same time, he was like, but you keep on walking. I'm like, okay, what if I send you on to Rates, where we eventually wanted to walk through Velo de Condo and then along the river to Rates, and then I'll meet you there. And he's like, that's a great idea. So I sent him to the place we were going to stay in Rates, put him in an Uber, my 17-year-old son, and then contacted the place we were going to stay, and they kindly said, oh, we're full tonight. And so here I've sent my
Uh-oh.
17-year-old son in a foreign country to a place to lay while he's sick, to lay down for the night, and he's got no place to stay. And so I found a place in Arcos, which is 3 kilometers back from Rates, and they were able to take him for the day, and he could get a bed right away and get well. But Arcos is 3 kilometers back, and when I contacted Stephen, he said, "Well, I can just walk back. I'll follow the Camino signs to go back from Rates to Arcos." So here's this poor guy, still feeling sick, throwing up in a foreign place. Nobody speaks his language. He's without his dad, and he's walking 3 extra kilometers now in the heat of the day to go find a place to lie down. But that little journey gave him the confidence to kind of go, I can do this. I can walk without my dad. Like, I can find my way from place to place and read the signs and make it work.
Isn't that something?
It really was cool. It really was cool in retrospect. Yeah.
It reminds me of when you're teaching someone how to swim and you just throw them into the deep end and go, figure it out.
Yeah.
Which I don't advocate for, but
right. It wasn't my intent as a dad. I wanted to, make it a pleasant transition rather than a drowning one, but he didn't drown. He did really well.
Well, and it's interesting too, because it sounds like in the telling that this just unfolded and it happened and you worked it out, and this is what the Camino threw at you, and so this is what you handled.
Yes, we at the time when he was laying on that fancy chair on the beach and on the coastal route, we didn't think it was a gift, but in the end, it was a gift that Camino gave us for sure.
Wow.
So the evening of that now second day, he slept all day. He wasn't too hungry for lunch or anything like that. But by late afternoon, he was joining me on a patio there in Arcos, and we went for dinner together. And that was great, with a whole bunch of people that were there in that villa, which was so fun, sitting around a table with people from places I've never heard of and sharing our stories. It was really cool.
Wow. For many people, that is what the Camino experience is. Would you say that's true for you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, physically, the Camino is a serious physical experience, but socially and the ways that you unpack sort of yourself and is really done in context with people so often. And especially people that are different from you in beautiful ways. Yeah.
Ooh, I like that. We'll dive into that a little bit more later.
Sure.
Let's keep walking. Let's see how your journey unfolded. You had this plan.
Yeah.
First day out of the gate, or second day out of the gate, Stephen's sick. You deal with that. Next day, you're moving on. What happens next?
So next day we walk from Caldas to, and I don't even have the exact direction, but we walk from town to town. And some days Stephen and I would get up early together at like 5 a.m. Oh, actually, the next day from Arcos, I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and walked. And he's like, I feel confident I can walk on my own. And he started at 7. And so we walked at different times and met different people along the way. But then by lunchtime was it Barcellinos or Barcellos or whatever it is, if that makes sense? I might be getting my towns mixed up. Anyway, wherever we met for lunch.
Wherever you met midday. Yeah.
He was already caught up with me.
Which you had a feeling that his pace would be faster than yours when we talked the first time.
For sure. And my pace is not slow, but his pace is fast. In fact, one person that we met, Ruby, nicknamed Stephen Stevie Gonzalez. Ruby was from Mexico and gave him the nickname Stevie Gonzalez.
I love that. That's a play on Speedy Gonzalez, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, cartoon character.
Exactly.
I love it.
So that next day was sort of a beginning of experimenting that sometimes we can walk together, and that's great. And we get to talk and process and see things together and have shared experiences. And that was amazing. And then other times we would walk apart and I would know that he was okay. And I would get some of the solitude that I was craving. And it really was a great balance. It really was good. And every night we stayed in the same place. So I would always get there first, or typically get there first. And then we would stay in the same place and have dinner together and unpack our days. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So let's keep moving down the trail. What happened? What else unfolded on this journey?
Well, so I'm not going to go chronological because we're going to just bore your listeners.
That's okay.
But so we make our way through Oh man, there's so many places to go. So I'm going to start with sort of staying on Stephen and sort of the macro of the journey.
Yeah.
And toward the end, should I go there already now, or should I first talk about what we saw along the way?
You decide whatever makes the most sense for how you want to tell the story.
Well, I introduced Ruby, so why don't I first take us to Tamel?
Okay.
So as we're walking along, we stayed in an albergue in Tamel. That was like our third night, right? And it was the first time we're in an albergue, first experience. Like we line up outside as we're waiting for it to open because we got there at 1:30, didn't open till 2. We take off our shoes as we go in, realize we got to put them in a stinky shoe closet and look at all these strangers and like sort of vying for place in line to make sure we get a bed, which really wasn't a problem. And these strangers later on became friends, like people that we ate with and drank with and talked with. And one of them was a fellow by the name of Mateo, who I met earlier in the day and was walking with for a little bit. And I was just fascinated by, he was doing this walk as sort of an act of thanksgiving to God for his family. We met this girl named Annika from Germany, and she had a fascinating story. We met Ruby, who Steve and I right away both. She reminded us of our third daughter, Stephen's older sister, Megan. And because Ruby was just full of life and full of excitement and, nothing but smiles and just really infectious personality. And maybe we're missing home a little bit too and missing our family back home. But we connected with these people and had dinner. And I remember, so profoundly, we're sitting around this stone picnic table outside, and we had ordered pizza together with the 5 of us, Annika and Mateo and Ruby and Stephen and I. And all of a sudden, this neighborhood cat comes up to us, and Annika starts panicking because she's allergic to cats. Without prompting, without anybody saying anything, Stephen sort of makes it his personal mission to keep this cat away from Annika when she's eating her pizza, right? And I was just marveling, watching him going, you are such a caring person. Like, it was just really cool to watch. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, who raised him?
Mostly his mother, clearly. Yeah,
I bet it was a team effort.
yeah. There was a village involved for sure too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we
Good.
met other fascinating people there. It was so cool. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, so let's jump ahead to the part about the injury.
Yeah, the injury. So we did not see this coming. So in our second last day before Santiago, we had left Caldas. I left early in the morning, Caldas de Reis. It's in Spain, between Tui and Santiago. And I had left early in the morning, about 5 o'clock. It was starting to rain a little bit, and Stephen left maybe around 7:30. And as I'm walking along and meeting people and so on, I get this text from Stephen saying my foot hurts. And teenagers can sometimes in their communication be cryptic. And so I thought, oh, okay, that must be a pain, like, to keep on going. And he's like, no, I don't think I can walk anymore.
Oh,
Like my foot hurts. But he was like between two towns. Like, sometimes you're on the journey and like you got a couple kilometers back or forward.
right.
And that's where he was. And so he kept on walking to the next town where we got him an Uber to catch up with me, or actually to pass me and get to Padrón. And so by the time I got to Padrón, Stephen had already been to the hospital, and we went back to the hospital there in Padrón. And by the way, I was so impressed with the Spanish healthcare system, how attentive and quick and low cost they were. The hospital charged us nothing. The prescription that they gave him was €1.97. Like a set of crutches for him was, I think, €13. It was like, we are not in Canada here. Like,
Nor are you in the US.
you're right. We're in Canada for the low prices, in the US for the quick service. Yeah. Anyway, but we realized you can't walk the rest of the Camino.
And how far are you from Santiago at this point?
So in Padrón, we are in our last, like we had one stage to go to get to Santiago.
So close.
So close. And so the doctor said he needs to stop walking. You need to get attention as quickly as you can. Ideally, you should, go back to Canada where your healthcare is, and you can go do the full, X-rays and MRIs and whatever needs to be done. We were able to get a flight early flight, not the next day, but the day after that. So then we decided, okay, he'll take a Uber into Santiago. I'll still walk to Santiago from Padron. So I was able to finish my Porto to Santiago and walk every step of that.
Okay.
But he Ubered in, and we realized very quickly we're done. We're going home tomorrow, right? And so
Wow.
it was grieving, jarring, trying to figure it out. I remember standing there first alone in front of the cathedral because he was, waiting for me to get to town, and I'm just, take a selfie, and I'm just bawling my eyes out. Not even just because it was over, but because wow, I did this.
Yeah.
Like I did this. But then also, yeah, the fact that it was over. And so we knew that we were going to leave the next morning. We decided because his goal was to get to Finisterre, we rented a car from Santiago, drove out to Finisterre, it just felt criminal to start driving out to Finisterre after planning to walk it.
Yes.
But so we get to Finisterre. We both got our rocks from back home that represent things that we're letting go of. The plan was to go down to the ocean shore and throw them into the ocean. We get to Finisterre, where there's a parking lot right up by kilometer 0, and he's now, hobbling along with crutches. And so we walk up to kilometer marker 0, decide not to go down the hill to the water's edge, but to throw our stones from up there. Stephen goes to throw his stone, and it lands with a thud in the mud.
Oh, not what
And
he envisioned, huh?
not what he envisioned at all. And in his brilliance, in that moment, he said, I guess that seals it. I got to come back and finish this. And so that was pretty cool moment as a dad, to hear him say that. I threw my stone. I'm still not sure if it made it to the ocean or not. But
Maybe the key feature here is that you let it go.
yeah, hey, that's actually I'll take that. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah.
I just want to pause for a second. I'm actually really moved by this story
Mm.
and how we have a picture in our mind of how it's supposed to go. And what you've just told me is it's just not done. It's not bad. It isn't wrong. It's not a disaster, but it's just now unfinished.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfinished and it's not unfinished. Like in one sense, we did this, and nobody can take away all of those memories and the people that we met and the impact they had on us and we on them. But yeah, it did leave us sort of wanting more. And he named that quicker than I did, even though I knew I was going there sort of as a planning trip to eventually do the Francés. But yeah, I'm eager to get back, and in fact, am planning to go back in February with my wife Carol, who I may have dissed the last time I talked to you by saying she wanted a luxury trip. She just simply wanted a normal trip, but in Camino terms, that's called a luxury trip.
So just not staying in these shared dorms in the albergues.
Yeah, yeah. Although a fan of other people, not a fan of sleeping with anybody but me in the room. So yeah, yeah,
Here, here.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good line to draw and to know yourself that is
Yeah,
where your boundaries are.
yeah. She's very good at that. Mhm.
Okay, so you and Carol are going back in February.
Yes.
What are Stephen's plans?
So Stephen is making plans with his friend David, and they're talking about going back in May again, the same timing that Stephen and I went this past year. So yeah. And so Carol and I are just going to do 1 week, just from Tui to Santiago. But she's made a compromise already in that she's going to carry a backpack rather than do the luggage transfer, partly to just see, how well will the Francés work for her.
Hmm.
So that's kind of exciting to think about.
Okay, and what made you choose February?
So partly weather, partly my own job as a realtor. It's typically a quiet time in real estate and easier for me to get away. And we have other things planned around it. But the weather side, like it's warm enough, it's dry enough, like it's warm enough that you need to use layers, but because we're staying in like not albergues, but places that provide blankets and sheets, so we don't need to bring a sleeping bag. Because we're not in hot weather, we don't need to bring like a pair of aerated like summer shoes, so we can just wear Gore-Tex shoes all day long, whether it's wet or dry. So February made sense to us.
Great. Yeah,
Mhm.
great. And will Stephen and David walk the Portuguese again? Is that their plan?
They're not sure yet, and they're not sure how long they're going to go yet. I think because David hasn't done it yet, it's a new thing for him, and they're still in mid conversation. And you know, teenagers, they do love to plan things, mostly conceptually, and then at the last minute in detail. So
Got it. Got it. So something will happen.
something will happen. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
I love that. Well, and I also have this picture in my mind now of Stephen being the lead and
Right.
taking his friend over and saying, "Let me show you the ropes. Let me show you how this goes."
Yeah.
And what, he'll be 18 by then. I mean, I just
Yep. Yep.
think about what this has set him up for his future and
For
for
sure.
his
Yeah.
stance. I mean, I picture, metaphorically standing strong on his 2 feet,
Mhm.
just standing strong in who he is and being able to walk into the future with that. And that's probably enough metaphor for now. But
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. Yeah. No, that's so, so true. Yeah.
yeah. How do you feel as a father having seen him do this journey?
Well, I said to him, as I watched him interact with others as a young man, I was so proud of him. I feel like I went there with a boy and came back with a man. And that's kind of cliche, but it really did feel that way. Uh, yeah, we had a really sweet moment in the and he'll probably chalk it up to fatigue. So maybe he'll, if he ever listens to this podcast, say, I was tired, Dad. But
Shout out to
but
Stephen. Here we go.
but in Santiago, when you're handing in your credential to get the Compostela, or you keep your credential, of course, but you show your credential to get your Compostela, then the lady there who was English speaking from the US and had a nice long conversation with us, she said to him, so you had a unique opportunity. You got to find out whether you like your dad, right? And Stephen, and I'll grant that he was tired, he says with tears in his eyes, like him, I love him.
Oh,
He was like, I'll keep that.
stop it.
That's a win. That's a win. So that was really
Wow.
cool. And one other time too. So this is when we were staying in Caldas. Actually, we're staying at Albergue Timonel, and nice room there, and we had a beautiful spot. And I had left earlier than him that day, and we didn't walk together at all that day because he was taking his time meeting people and everybody else. So I got there 2 hours before him, and it had been raining all day. And so my stuff is all drying out, and there's lots of room there. And I'm waiting for him to show up. And as a dad, I'm preparing. Like, my son's going to be down. Like, I got to encourage him. We just have 2 days to go, right? This is before his injury. And all of a sudden, the door to our room opens, and there's Stephen, soaking wet, like as like a drowned rat. Didn't even bother putting on his rain gear, which he had with him in his pack, right?
Oh no.
He has a huge smile on his face. And he's like, I had the greatest day. And man, that memory was just amazing.
Oh,
Yeah, watching him interact with people, developing a name for being, Stevie Gonzalez. There were times when we'd walk together and he would encourage me and he'd say, Dad, you got to learn to run uphill. I'm like, what?
hmm?
And he'd be like, yeah, because uphills suck. And so like if you run, they're over quicker, right? And then he had this idea that when it's like, sometimes you're walking the trail and it's hot and it's sunny and sometimes it's shady. It's like when it's sunny, you run. And when it's shady, you walk, right? Walk slow so you can spend as much time there as you can. And so he was pacing himself in ways that I hadn't thought about.
Ah, the mind of a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to see how we go after problems differently, how
Oh,
we
yeah.
address them and how we see them. Are they problems or are they just things to deal with? Or,
Right.
are they mountains or are they molehills? What do we do
Right.
with them?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love these stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Mm,
so good. So good.
yeah.
Since you mentioned rain gear, let me go
Mm.
ahead and segue into, let's talk about your gear, what worked and what didn't work. So we'll start with rain gear. Any particular reason why it stayed in his pack?
Good question. His rain gear did work. He had used it before for whatever reason. I think that day he was getting wet and he just thought, why not? So he just let himself get wet. So report on Steven's rain gear, it worked, but he didn't always find it necessary, even when it was pouring rain.
And was that a poncho or a rain jacket?
No, it was a good quality, bright orange, don't get hit by a car rain jacket. And he didn't, neither one of us brought rain pants. We both decided that if it was raining, we'd go Gore-Tex shoes and shorts, and it was warm enough for that.
Right.
And that did work really well for me. And I think I wouldn't have wanted rain pants in May because I would have been too warm. And I'd read people say the same thing.
Okay.
My rain jacket worked really well. And I considered it a layer. So sometimes when it wasn't raining early in the morning, because I was starting out when it was still fairly cool, I would sometimes have it on already then. Yeah.
I love that about the rain jacket.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also love that then it's just another piece of clothing that you can wear anywhere else in Europe, whether you're in the big city, in the airport, on the train, or, even at home. It's another piece of the wardrobe at home.
Totally.
Ponchos, not so much.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I saw people with ponchos and they looked, no less unhappy than I was in the rain. But yeah, I liked using a rain jacket. It worked really well for me.
Excellent. Now you said you had two pairs of shoes. You had a waterproof and a not waterproof.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe I overplanned, but I had planned on, because it was May as well, and I was a little bit concerned about heat in the day. I had planned on my early morning shoes would be one size, and they would be Gore-Tex. And then my afternoon shoes would be a size bigger, and they would be very open, airy, both trail runners. Were they both Solomon? I'm not sure what. Anyway, no, I think one was Asics and one was Solomon. But yeah, I had two pairs of shoes, Gore-Tex in the morning and non-Gore-Tex in the afternoon.
And how did that work for you?
That would have worked perfectly had I not been foolish. So on my second day, as I'm making my way into Arcos, where Stephen is waiting for me, having been sick in the morning, I'm walking down this hill and it's got like water flowing down the hill into Arcos, and it's muddy. And earlier in the day, I had gotten a lot of manure on my shoes in the walk from the coast over to Arcos. And so I thought, I'm just going to get my shoes nice and wet on the outside to wash this manure off before I get to my room. And then later that night, I continued to wash my shoes with a high power hose and get all the stuff off the outside of it. What I didn't realize was that I was getting them wet inside.
Oh, phooey.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that. When I left in the morning, I thought, oh, it's kind of cool. Even my feet are a little cool, right? And so I walked for probably 15 kilometers the next morning in soaking wet shoes on the inside.
Oh,
Yeah. So I stopped, and which was probably too long to stop, because had planned to check my, whether I was going to have blisters or not more often, and change my socks every, 6 to 8 kilometers and grease my feet and all that. But I went a little bit long and they were wet, and I had blisters on both feet, on both heels.
oof.
Yeah. So I was pretty bummed, to say the least. However, following some really good advice that I'd read or heard you say, but also read online, I made sure that they were clean. I made sure that they were, what's the right word? Punctured, popped? Anyway,
Yeah.
we get the idea.
Yeah.
And so I did the drained, and then I put these Compeed bandages over them.
Yep.
And then at every stop, I take the Compeed off, dry them out, put new Compeed on. And although I had blisters on both feet, they did not in any way impede my walking. It wasn't painful. It worked out really well. So
Great. And that's the thing, is just to make sure they don't get infected, because infected blisters are what will send you home.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and I was surprised that they weren't painful. I think the Compeed helped with that quite a bit. It provided padding, and the fact that they were punctured meant that they weren't pressured, right?
Right. Yes. And so you carried two pairs of walking shoes.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. How much extra weight did that put in your bag?
That was another 700 grams. So what would that be? About almost 2 pounds, pound and a half.
Pound and a half. Yeah.
Yes. that. Yeah.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. It sounds like it was worth it.
So I would say it was worth it for May. When Carol and I go in February, of course, it's cooler then. We're not worried about hot weather during the day, and we're only going about 20 kilometers a day, which is shorter than Stephen and I traveled in a day. And so I'm just going to bring one pair of shoes then.
Okay. And you've learned not to hose them off.
Right. Yes. I will make other foolish mistakes in the future, but I will not repeat that
I love that. We learn. We learn
one.
as
Oh,
we
yeah.
go. Okay, make a note. Don't do that again.
Yeah. Still fallible, but, yeah.
I often joke that I have a master's degree in don't do that again.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was actually the topic of my thesis.
Oh, that's a great line. That's a great line.
Yeah. All right. So how about sleeping gear?
Yes.
Sleeping bags or sleeping bag liners?
So we brought sleeping bags and they were very lightweight. Like I want to say they were about 600 grams each and very compact. And we had them in waterproof compression socks in our backpacks. And they worked well. I wasn't hot or anything like that. In retrospect, because so many of the albergues had blankets, I could have gotten away with a liner quite
Okay.
easily. I was surprised by how many albergues had blankets.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Good to know. And you had been debating, but I think you sort of gave up on the idea of using trekking poles. Where did you land on trekking poles?
Yeah, still no trekking poles. Still, you know, God bless the people who use them. I won't be among them. So
Okay. And the reason for that? What would be the reason for that?
I think I didn't experience any fatigue in my arms or in like I mean I was generally tired at the end of the day, but I didn't experience any fatigue like that you need to keep your arms up. I didn't have any concerns about balance anywhere along. And I'm still a terrible dancer. I cannot even imagine that I would like the rhythm of having something in my hand. And
Okay.
that's the other thing. I didn't want something in my hand.
Gotcha. Hands-free Camino.
Yeah, I wanted to be able to, yeah, focus on the Camino.
Right.
Yeah,
And it's really great as an example. They're not for everyone. They
right.
serve their purpose
Oh
for
yeah.
people who need them, but if you don't need them, it's not how do I say it? It's not a required accessory. So you have to have boots. You have to
Mhm.
have something to carry your stuff in, but
Right,
you
right,
don't have to have trekking poles.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I met a lot of people who use trekking poles and they would swear by them. I
Mhm.
think I'd end up swearing with them, so I probably shouldn't use them.
Well, I think you called it there. Very good. Very good. So one more logistical question.
Sure.
You mentioned that you called an Uber a couple times
Right,
for
right. Mhm.
Stephen.
Oh yeah.
Tell us about Uber. Is it Uber in Portugal and Spain?
Yeah. Yeah, it was Uber.
Same, same.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, it was quick. It was fast. There were also local taxis that you could hire when Stephen went from like when he was injured into Padrone. He hired a local taxi. The next morning, he wanted to take care of his own taxi. So I still don't even know how he got to Santiago, but anyway, he did. So yeah,
All right. And you use the app on your phone to do
I just
that?
used the app on my phone. Yeah, and I used Google Translate so that just sort of as a courtesy to the driver, but also recognizing they might not speak English and ought not be expected to. I would go Google Translate for my request and then just cut and paste it into the Uber app, and it was very simple. Yeah.
Excellent. And same Uber app that you used
Oh yeah,
in
yeah.
Canada?
Same Uber app with this, all the different economy X, whatever. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Very good. And I will say that there probably are places, especially on the Francés, where you might not be able to get an Uber.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, but there certainly are taxi options. It may not be a yellow taxi with the word taxi on top, but it might be the cousin of the man who works at the bar,
Right.
who has a car, who drives people around. But yeah, that's good to know that it was that easy.
Just that brings up a story, if I may.
Sure.
The night that we were leaving Santiago, or the night we were preparing to leave Santiago to go to Porto the next day to get on the plane to go home early, I had originally in my Google Doc that had all my plans put in, we were going to book that train from Finisterre to go to Porto, but now we're going from Santiago to Porto. I knew that there was a bus and train and that there were options. That night when I went to book them, they were sold out for the next day.
Hmm.
And like I could not find a bus or train to take us from Santiago to Porto. So then I'm like, okay, I'll rent a car. could not find a car rental company that had a car there in Santiago that I could take over the border and leave in Porto the next day. Then I looked at hiring a taxi, and that was going to be, oh, I can't even remember what the cost was going to be. Insane. Like I think something like 600 or 800 euro. Like it was just
Wow.
through the roof.
Wow.
Then the concierge at the place that we're staying in Santiago, she says, well, have you thought about asking this guy that runs Hobby Rental Cars? And so the guy that ran the rental car company said, what I'll do is I'll meet you early in the morning. I'll drive you to Porto and come back. And he did that. I mean, it was still expensive. It was 350 euros, but it was way less than the cost that it would have been. And now we're just arguing with our insurance company to get that back. But
Okay.
first world problems.
Wow. So
Mhm.
what's the lesson there?
The lesson is, and I knew this, but I just didn't think it in the moment because we were planning, on the run. Is you've got to book that bus or train ticket back from Santiago days ahead of time.
Hmm.
Right? I couldn't book it months ahead of time because they didn't have it available months ahead of time. But you've got to book it days ahead of time.
Yes. Yes. Especially during these busy times. May is a pretty busy time
Mhm.
on the Camino.
Yeah.
And in Santiago. Yeah. So, and sometimes, and I like to steer clear of absolutes because sometimes it'll work and there
Right.
will be, line up 15 people and five of them it worked for.
Right.
Five of them can't remember if it worked and five of them had a terrible time.
Right.
So, you just don't know, but I think that's good advice. And what I always suggest is as soon as you know your travel date, if it's immovable, go ahead and book it
Right.
once it's available to book.
Right.
You didn't know your travel date. You had a plot twist that you could not have seen coming.
Right. And even knowing our travel date, our original departure was from Finisterre, right? So it was going to be from Finisterre back to Santiago and into Porto. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And that's the thing. People always ask, I need to get to Porto from Finisterre. How does that happen? Well, it's always via Santiago
for
because
sure.
Santiago is the transportation hub.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, very
Yeah,
good.
they have lots of ways to do it, but if you have to catch a particular flight time out of Porto, you better have planned
Yeah,
ahead.
plan ahead. Exactly. And missing an international flight is a little disruptive to the plans.
Yeah, especially with a boy on crutches. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
at this point, a man on
A
crutches.
man on a young man on crutches. Well, hats off to both of you for the way that
Oh,
you handled that. And I can just hear in your stories how
mhm.
much you both got out of it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was fantastic and left us both with a taste for more as our plans show, for
Oh,
sure.
I like that. What I'd like to do now, if you're okay with it, is shift gears from the practical, logistical, this is what happened that we could have observed happening to the more interior stuff.
Mhm.
And I listened to your episode, your first episode again, and I was reminded that you had shared three reasons or topic areas as to why this was a significant trip for you and what you were looking to get out of it. And I'd love to hear your comments on those. So I'll just remind you what you said in case you don't remember. You said one reason to do this was the physical challenge. Another was to travel because you love to travel and discover while you're out traveling. And the third was that you were coming up on a significant milestone in terms of decades in your life. And you're going to roll into the next decade and you were looking ahead to see what might be coming in the next decade and use this as a chance to ponder. So I'd love for you to just talk about whatever was significant to you in any of that you'd like to share with us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I probably the easiest way is to kind of go through those in that same order. And physically, I was surprised at how I could do this. Like, 58-year-old me didn't have a problem. I mean, I had planned, I had trained, I had prepared, but I could do it. And I would even say I could do it easily. There were, the day that we planned to do we had one day where we planned to do two shorter stages on the same day. Like we just like partway through the morning, we're like, I think we can go all the way to, and I can't remember the two towns now, but I think we can go all the way to there, and we did it. And it was like, I'm tired and I could use a drink and a shower, but it was, yeah. So the physical side was just, it was good. It was a good workout, but it was doable. The
Right.
travel, I love Portugal and I love Spain too, but I love Portugal. Like they are both lovely places. And particularly in Portugal, we just found the people so friendly and in Spain as well. But yeah, they were just very, yeah. And the food, the variety of food was amazing. The hospitality, I love traveling, and this did not disappoint in any way.
Right.
Probably the biggest piece to talk about for myself, though, was the interior piece. And in the last podcast, I had talked about how I'd kind of lived my life in 10-year epochs or decades, right? And in this last decade, as somebody who's been trained as a pastor, now leading a house church, but working full time as a realtor, I'm getting ready for retirement sometime in the next decade. And I've been thinking about this transition that's happening for me personally and professionally away from sort of ordained pastoral ministry because the denomination I'm a part of is becoming a mess around yeah, some judgments against people that I just think are not in line with my faith at all. And so I know that I have to move away from that sort of recognition of being an ordained pastor. And yet at the same time, I carry the same heart that I've always had. And I'm working as a realtor. And so I wanted a lot of time to ponder sort of my professional identity or my the voice of your life is your vocation. Ponder my vocation.
Mm.
Because Stephen got sick the second day, he was able to walk on his own a lot, and I was afforded more time alone than I thought I was going to have. And I spent a lot of that time just thinking, praying, wondering. And one day, uh, I saw a lizard on a wall, and I'm walking along, and I see this lizard crawling along this rock wall beside me, and all of a sudden it hits me how this lizard is loved by God, its creator, and free, like completely free to dart in and out of a rock and back out in the sunshine and back into the shade and out of nowhere. And thankfully, there was no one around to hear this. I just started singing a song I've never heard before. And I hope for the people around me, no one ever hears again. But I just started singing my faith about a lizard on a wall and how God had given me this lizard on a wall. And it was, oh man. I did at one point record it so I could remember the tune and play it back to myself. But yeah, I went stanza after stanza after stanza of words of my faith that were related to the way that God was caring for me like a lizard on a wall. And
Wow.
as I depart from my pastoral ordained identity to just a regular follower of Jesus, that was really helpful for me. But then there were also three conversations that I had with people along the way. One young man and two younger women, and they were going through significant things. You know, it is you meet people, where you're from, where you're going, and why are you on a Camino? The same kind of conversations we have back home all the time. Not really, right? You go deep right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on these three conversations with Tomislav, with Ruby, and with Kathy, they invited me to function pastorally for them.
Mm.
And they invited me to speak words of hope. And like they wanted to talk to me and they wanted me to speak to them. And it was, I know it was helpful for them, and that's not what the story is about. It was helpful for me because it was like I was able to know I don't need to wear an ordained hat. Like I didn't tell any of them that I was an ordained minister, right? I didn't need to wear an ordained hat to help somebody on their walk, literally, right? And I came up with this phrase: my pastoral identity is tied to my heart and my actions, not to my title, right? And so as my
Yeah.
nation, because of my stances to fully include, all people, as my denomination takes away my ordination, I know that I'm still a pastor. And that was so huge for me. Yeah.
Well, I love the use of the word vocation. And
Mm,
I've never connected that to that is your voice in the world. That
yeah.
is so spot on. And
Mm.
it sounds like that's what you found. You found a new voice on the
Yeah.
Camino.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to hear the lizard song, please.
No, I don't think you would. It's not pleasant. And no, I'm not going to start singing because then it's going to get out there and oh my goodness. People tell me to stop whistling all the time. If I start singing on a podcast, I'm doomed. Uh, These friends I have will all be gone.
Oh, we need a hidden camera on you. Are there any of the lyrics that you could share with us?
Sure. I won't sing it because I care about your listeners. One of the lyrics goes like this. Lord, help me walk. Lord, help me as I crawl. You sent me this day, this lizard on the wall. Show me how to trust when I can't see your face. On this walk I walk, I'm tired for the race.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Sometimes silly things hide really deep, important things.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope I don't see another lizard today. I'm a goner.
Well, there might be some emotion still waiting to come out.
Oh yeah, I hope so. I,
Yeah. Well, that leads me to the sort of the home stretch here on what I'd like to ask you about.
sure.
How has your reentry been when you've come home from the Camino and you are on the end of this experience that clearly is a beginning? What has
Right.
the reentry been like for you?
Right. So because we came back early, I suddenly had a week that I had planned to be away from my business and I didn't need to attend to it yet. Although I did kind of, you know, tiptoe in it a little bit, I didn't have to be on it full. So I was able to slowly come back. I was physically tired.
Mm,
I was physically tired when I came home. And so I guess somehow I didn't anticipate that. Part of that was jet lag, but I think part of it was, there were days where I was walking like 40 or 50,000 steps, right? So it made sense that I was tired.
sure.
We were also pretty coomed, and I thankfully had lots of time for it to get Stephen to the doctor, to the physiotherapist, to the hospital, to get an MRI, to do all the things that were necessary to get him the kind of medical attention that he needed for him to be able to recuperate. Unfortunately, he ended up losing a number of weeks of work and is even just now in mid-July getting back to full time. He is a soccer player and loves playing soccer. He's just now getting back to playing soccer, and so he's had some grief,
Mm.
but yeah.
What was his diagnosis?
So, boy, this will sound a little bit technical, but for your medical friends out there, attached to your Achilles tendon is a thing called the posterior tibialis, which is like a series of tendons. Picture a bunch of wires all running together. And they go from your Achilles tendon to the growth plate, which is a bone on the top of your foot. They kind of go around your ankle that way. And by the way, Stephen, he's a bright kid and he has always been fascinated with the human body. And so he had already figured out in Spain, I'm pretty sure this is my posterior tibialis. And sure enough, it was. And what holds all those wires together is a thing called the retinaculum. It's like a band that goes around it. And the retinaculum was strained and stressed because the tibialis was strained and stressed. And we learned that Stephen's growth plate actually has a birth defect and that his growth plate is wider than normal.
Hmm.
And so now, fully recovered, we are going to be getting him fitted for orthotics.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah,
Ah,
yeah. So that's what he was diagnosed with.
okay.
So fully recovered, and but took a long time.
Yeah.
Doesn't heal fast.
Hmm. Well, and a really important feature of that story is that he got the appropriate care
Yeah.
and sounds like he heeded the advice of his medical team.
Oh yes, very very much so. Yeah, and it was thankfully the Euros started and hockey season, NHL playoffs was on, and so he had things to watch, and his buddies would come over, and although he was in his words bored out of his mind, He did have some respites of joy in the middle of that and not
Okay.
working, but yeah, he's recovered.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah.
So the last question that I want to ask you is as you have talked about your Camino experience and people have asked you questions about it,
Mm.
is there any question that no one has yet asked you that you really wish someone would? Another way to say that is there something you want to share about your Camino, but you haven't had the chance because no one has asked about it?
Maybe it's a question I've asked myself, and I don't think I would have expected the people around me to ask it. I mean, I'm an Enneagram 7 visionary, forward thinking, always planning for the future. I loved planning the Camino, but I always sort of had this belief that fulfillment is in front of me,
Mm.
right? And it's coming, right? And it sometimes makes it difficult for me to be present in the now.
Mhm.
And a question that I'm asking myself is, why did I walk so fast?
Mm.
And if I wanted to give advice to my pre-Camino self, it would be to walk slower. Stop figuring out or trying to figure out or angling for how you can, quote unquote, get this thing done.
Mm.
Somewhere in the middle of my Camino, some guy passed me. And I was like, you're the first person who's ever passed me. Like, how fast are you going? And he's like, I'm on a 50-kilometer-a-day pace.
Wow.
He had been walking from Lisbon and he was just going.
Wow. That's 32 miles a day.
Yeah. So I would want to walk slower. I will walk slower when I go with Carol because she walks slower. Maybe she already knows this stuff intuitively.
What will that give you? What do you think will be different if you walk more slowly?
Um, More time with other people who are walking slowly.
Mm.
I had a freedom, and that was I was never stuck talking to anybody that I didn't want to talk to because I could just keep on walking.
Perfect. This is my pace. Got to go.
Right. Well, and even like this Mateo fellow that I met and I really enjoyed, and I was clearly walking faster than him. And on the trail, I caught up with him and we walked for a little while and I was enjoying our conversation. But then he said to me, "You're clearly walking faster than me. Why don't you just go ahead?" Right. And he was enjoying the conversation too, but he knew that I was like slowing myself
You were
down.
holding back. Yeah.
So then I didn't walk with him the rest of the day. Thankfully, he was at the albergue that I was at, and we got to reconnect. And he was one of the people I was sitting around with, and so I think I would connect with more people. Maybe I went fast because I wanted to prove I could do it, but if you know you can do it, take your time.
Mm. Some good reflections.
Yeah, yeah.
Anything else you'd like to share?
Um, the only other thing that I maybe just a little bit about the fact that Carol and I are going in February. So when I was originally planning to go, I was going to go on my own, and then I invited my boys, and my 17-year-old wanted to go with me, and Carol was like, "Go ahead." I'm not staying in a place where there could be somebody with loud snoring or whatever noises people make at night beside me. But as we were there, she was like, I'm kind of wishing I would have done this. So when I got back and Stephen was saying, I'm going to do this again, then she said, I'd like to go with you. So we're planning to go in February just to do 1 week, the last week of the Portuguese again, in preparation to see whether she wants to come with me on the Francés eventually.
Okay.
So originally, and I said that she wanted to go on a luxury trip. She just wanted to go on a normal trip. We're not going to stay in albergues. We're going to stay in places where we have a room to ourselves. But originally, as she and I were planning for February, it was that she was going to send her stuff on via the luggage transfer services, which, by the way, I understand are very good, and there's no diss against that. But as we've been planning, she eventually made the decision, because my backpack was getting lighter and I could carry more, that she could carry a backpack after all. So over the last month, we've gone out. She's gotten a backpack. She's started wearing it once in a while. And the other day I was out showing houses to real estate clients, and she texted me a picture of herself doing stuff around the house, and she had her backpack on. And so I am just like, wow, what a partner God's given me to, walk this journey together with me in February, and just really looking forward to that.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The backpack is actually a significant companion on the
Yeah.
trail, on your
Oh, yeah.
journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of lessons to be had by carrying everything with you rather than using the luggage transport services.
Totally.
Yeah.
I was so thankful that I didn't have anything that I needed to throw away. Like I used
Mm,
everything, right?
good packing.
When I go with Carol, I don't need my second pair of shoes and I don't need my sleeping bag. And so I'm losing about 3 pounds worth already. But yeah, I was very thankful that it worked out well.
Great. I also wonder if the luggage transport services are available in February. I know on the Camino Francés, they are available from Sarria to Santiago, but possibly not any other place on the route unless
Okay.
you may have to pay a lot more in order to
Right,
have
right.
them on. That's considered off season. So
Sure.
who knows? So yeah, good call on that. But yeah, it's definitely a different experience and one that I recommend that people have. And I say that most of my listeners know that I now use luggage transport services and
Right,
don't bother packing light.
right.
But my first 7 years on the Camino, I carried a backpack, and it defined my Caminos for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there is something kind of powerful. And maybe when we get to year 7, we'll, start using luggage transfer services too. But there is something kind of powerful about carrying all of your stuff with you.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I also have observed pilgrims and the ones who have carried their backpack. So I might catch them down the trail past Leon on the Frances, which is what 400, 500 kilometers in.
Mm,
There's a way that they carry themselves that's
mm,
different from people who have day packs. There's a solidity, there's a groundedness and a sort of an inner strength shining through that's different for people who carry their backpacks. It's really interesting if you observe when you're on the trail
yeah,
how people carry themselves who have carried their backpack the whole way and you see them with it on and you're
yeah.
like, yeah, they carried it. I can see it. It's interesting.
One little backpack story when we were in Bruges, I think it's called. It's like a big hill area on one of the days, and we got to the place we were staying, and the fellow that ran it wasn't there yet, so we had to wait. And so we're waiting for probably half an hour, Stephen and I. I took my backpack off and laid it on the stone wall. Half an hour later, I realized that Stephen was still wearing his backpack. And I said, Stephen, how come you didn't take your backpack off? And he's like, oh, yeah, I forgot it was there. So, like, somewhere along the journey, it does kind of become part of you and
It
you
does.
stop resenting it. And it's just like, this
Yeah.
is what I carry. Yeah.
It's a relationship. I firmly
Yeah.
believe that.
Yeah.
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 I would get to the point where I could tell the difference in weight if I took out, say, a snack bar
Oh,
uh,
wow.
or a bag of peanuts or bag of almonds. I'm
Oh,
like,
wow.
oh, that feels better. I'm lighter now. Yeah. Yeah.
Psychosomatic, maybe?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe. All right. Well, John, anything else you'd like to say or share or any
Oh,
final words of wisdom?
oh, you had to throw the word wisdom. No, then I got nothing. Then I got nothing.
No pass. Sorry.
No, I am so glad that I've started this season of my life that includes Camino, that has me looking at the world through the lens of Camino. I'm so glad that my son went with me. I can't even hardly believe that my wife Carol is going with me in February. And yeah, just
All
really
right.
thankful. And thankful for folks like you and the rest of the community that sort of help everybody else along their way.
Well, we do it out of love. We do it
Mhm.
because we love the Camino and what it provides for people
Sure,
and
sure,
what it's provided for us. Yeah.
for
So
sure.
happy to. And I appreciate hearing that. So
Awesome.
maybe come March or April next year, we'll hear back from you and Carol on how it went.
Sure, why not? Why
Why
not?
not? Maybe
Sure.
you'll have a additional. Well, yeah, maybe it won't be a lizard song this time. It could be a something about the snails on the Camino as you've slowed down.
The Camino will provide. We'll see. We'll see.
Very good, John. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh,
I really appreciate it.
thank you for your all of your podcasts and all your guests and letting me be one of them. Wow.
My pleasure. All right.